Yo, hell yeah. Wyatt begins in like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Wyatt, and I'm your host, Wyatt O'Brien Evans. Hey, to all my YouTubers out there, if you like what you hear and if you like what you see, just click that subscribe button at the bottom of your screen. And while you're at it, give me some likes, give me some love. Anywho, today's edition of Wyatt is both critical and powerful. The topic is the impact of incarceration on our communities. And our special guests are members of the National Trauma Education and Policy Institute. And I'm proud to say that I'm the Institute's LGBTQ Committee Chair. So, without further ado, let's get into it. In the last 40 years, the United States prison population has increased 500%. We're talking 500%. And the current number of inmates is at least 2.3 million. So on Tuesday and Wednesday, March the 26th and the 27th in Washington, D.C., the National Trauma Education and Policy Institute, NTEPI, will host the impact of imprisonment on our communities, which is a significant and watershed conference exploring and addressing the consequences that incarceration poses on all of us. So without further ado, allow me to welcome our very, very accomplished and distinguished panel for this critical episode of Wyatt. They are the members of the National Trauma Education and Policy Institute. We have David Schrank. We have Dr. Amit Dominique, who is the committee chair for conditions of confinement. We have Dominique Goodman, who is the committee chair for jail and prison diversion. And last but not least, we've got Dr. Charlie Williamson, the senior advisor to the board. Thanks for being on Wyatt. How the hell are you?
Good. Doing real good. How about you?
I am doing great. I'm so glad to have you guys on. And before I go any further, did you like my introduction?
Of course.
Yes, thank you.
That was phenomenal.
We tried.
Okay. But just put it on record. Dr. Charlie Williamson is also chairman of the board.
Oh, thank you for that, doctor. I really appreciate that. Okay, first I want to go to David. David, would you please tell our audience a little bit about your background and why you established the Institute and the Institute's mission?
Absolutely. So this was started because I had a substantial background in mental health and worked on jail prison diversion quite a lot. Mm-hmm. And to see the extent to which services and policy and the system cause for severe damage to certain specific communities, especially the Black community, it became a clear sign that a lot more needs to be done, and people need better education to learn how to truly address this issue appropriately, and for people who have been incarcerated or are incarcerated who really deserve to receive better services in order to stop that trend. Because I mean, when you look at the fact that in so many cities, the rate of recidivism is so high. In a period of time, I was working in Trenton, the rate of recidivism was 92%.
Wow.
The team that I had worked on took those stats down to about 30%, showing that when you're trained appropriately, huge differences can be made. And as I tried to work with various other organizations, the results were not coming. And I guess you could say I took it upon myself to seek out the top experts I could find from across the country to create the elite think tank to truly address the issues from both a policy standpoint and an educational standpoint, and that then became the birth of this institute.
Whoa. You know what, man? We need to clone you. We really do. Okay, so David, let's segue to the impact of imprisonment on our communities event. What was the inspiration, the impetus behind that creation?
It was setting a new standard, a new tone. I been to various other their groups that talked about trying to improve things, but there was no clear training. There was no clear, effective way of improving what's being offered. And I felt that this team could do a much better job. And also as a way to even get more funding to the institute by showing the effectiveness of just how brilliant members are. The senior advisors are amazing. The board is amazing, and therefore needed to start out with something very big, very powerful, and could set a new tone and show how serious we are of really making substantial changes, substantial differences. And that is my passion to the extreme, and the passion of everyone on this team.
Got it. Okay, let's go to the rest of the panel and have you guys introduce yourself. I'll let whoever wants to start off go first. Or should I call on somebody? Okay, Amit, Dr. Amit, would you just introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background?
Thank you, Wyatt. So Dr. Amit Dominic, the organization that I run is called Texas Prisons Community Advocates. Okay. And I started that organization based on the need from what I was hearing from our incarcerated individuals and our impacted family members. I started with the issue of not having air conditioning in our Texas prisons. So a lot of people don't realize that 70% of the prisons in Texas do not have full air conditioning. And the reason why that is such a pivotal, yes. Yeah, they don't. And we have huge facilities across the state of Texas. Right now, we have over 132,000 incarcerated individuals that we house. So the magnitude of this situation is extreme. I tell, people oftentimes that I'm talking to that are from other states, if you cut off the head of the giant, right, they all fall. Right. And Texas is definitely one of the giants with several leading trophies of atrocities. It's so bad in our Texas prisons that we have judges from Scotland and from Europe who will not extradite people to Texas to be in those prisons. And so that's how I got started. At that time, back in 2015, my ex-husband became incarcerated and I found out about the lack of AC. And that meant doing things like waiting out in the heat for 2 to 4 hours myself for visitation, because I had to try and get there at the time where it was the hottest so he can get just 2 hours of air conditioning. It looks like people who are crying out for their last breath because they're thinking they're not going to make it through our summers. It looks like people not receiving showers for weeks at a time. And so from that journey, I was actually able to work with Senator Menendez and Representative Canales in Texas, and we filed the
Okay.
first bills to get air conditioning in the Texas prisons, and we're still levying that fight. So that started. The first bills were filed in 2019. We've managed to get them across the House floor, but our Senate is a challenge. And from there, listening to the stories of our impacted family members, I realized how ignored they are. They're grieving, and they're grieving silently, and they're grieving in a small community, right? Because there's not a lot of safe places for them to talk about having an incarcerated loved one because of the narrative and the stigma that's associated with that. So hearing about what was going on with them, I also realized that these are individuals who need to be empowered. They need to be empowered to fight an oppressive system. So I started working on things like training them. How do you find your political official? How do you go to the Capitol? How do you help us to levy this fight? In other words, we're taking the farmers, right? And we're saying, put down your pitchfork. I need you to grab a sword. But at the same time, I need to bind your wounds, right? Because no one else is doing that, because you're the forgotten population. So that was the journey that has evolved into an organization that is all volunteer based. So these same impacted individuals are the ones who are part of leading the process, leading the fight. And that is, in a nutshell, the beginnings of my journey.
Thank you for that, Dr. Amit. Wow, that's a lot to think about. Okay, Dominique, would you introduce yourself and all that good stuff?
Um, my name is Dominique Goodman. I guess the best way to start introducing myself off is like saying I'm a military brat. So that I'll automatically lets people know, like, I really am from everywhere. I was born in California, but I was raised outside of the country until I got to high school. My parents retired in North Carolina. And so everything was pretty great. I went to North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, the number one HBCU in the country. That's important, but shout out to any HBCU.
Right.
And that's where I understood like community, right? And the impact of like support, and how like with it, like having large groups of people, like you're always like you're gonna be okay. Like once everybody is coming together and they're fighting, like it's good. But the one thing that I had never experienced is I guess being treated as I was Black in America. I was always a token Black person because of my California accent and speaking properly, and they liked the way I enunciated my vowel, like things like that. And so, like I was always like, the good one, right? If they knew me in real life, my mother would tell you no. But not in Arizona. I went out there to go to grad school. I was gonna go become get my master's in English, become a English professor at HBCU. I ended up getting in a car accident. It's a long story, crazy story. There's a whole podcast about it. But long story short, I ended up signing a plea for a crime I didn't commit. And it came with a penalty of 5 to 7.5 years. And my mom loves me, so she got another lawyer. We have signed affidavits from witnesses saying that was not the driver. She didn't do it. We have like all the tape saying it wasn't me. But the senior state of appeals, I'm saying that all like that's incorrect the way I said that. But the final state of appeals basically were like, we see what you're saying, but you already said you did it. So
okay.
So that kind of like fueled up like my anger. I started speaking out. That's when they started monetizing the prison systems and started having like a lot of TED Talks. I didn't know how big TED Talks were. I just knew that they were going to let me talk on the stage, and I needed to like find a way to snitch on the system, right? So I got accepted to speak up there. The part that I snitched out and I was able to get off, they ended up cutting off
Mm.
of the YouTube. So they said that the sound disconnected and you couldn't hear anymore, but I know the truth. But that's when I started coming out, and when as soon as I got out of prison, I immediately I felt like somebody had to do something about things,
Mm-hmm.
and I founded an organization, Correctional Views, because I wanted to create systems and institutions to teach people the laws and provide people this information because. Just for example, with the DUIs, in the state of North Carolina, you're not going to prison over a DUI. Your first charge. In Arizona, I was sentenced with a woman her sentence was 6 years for her second DUI in Arizona.
Mm.
That's
Okay.
it. Nobody
All right.
died.
Oh.
That's right. So it's just I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, I still have slight judgment. That's kind of crazy. After your first DUI in Arizona, you know how stupid they are, right? Why would you do anything in the state again? So I'm judging you a little bit, but the reaction of the state, it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started speaking out on just against the system in general because you're not even helping individuals. I'm here for a crime I didn't even commit, and I'm not even deemed safe enough to have any of the training or courses to help,
Mm-hmm.
rehabilitate me. Like, what are y'all doing for me?
Right.
Absolutely nothing. Dr. Dominic was speaking of the air conditions. In the state of Arizona, there's swamp coolers, right? So as soon as humidity strikes, what is that? And you're stuck in these cells, a lockdown, those doors closed. There's no street, there's no cracked windows, there's no nothing. There's just this humid air recirculating in this room, and good luck sleeping.
Okay.
So it's and it gets bad. In Arizona, you have days it's 125 degrees outside, like legit. Like that's the year that I was released, 2019, they made up like a new rule. Once it got past like 115 degrees, they wanted everybody to lock down. You guys are locking down everybody in this facility in 115-degree weather. Everybody does not have the money to buy ice, so everybody doesn't have ice in their room.
Okay, got it. I'm going to move on to Dr. Charlie Williamson. Would you please introduce yourself to us?
Yeah, well, it's a pleasure. And Dominic, I was very proud of
Mm-hmm.
you. Very proud of you. And thank you for sharing your story.
Oh,
It means a lot. It means a lot. And right as you were speaking, I was like, usually when I do these type of podcasts and stuff, I try to keep it very high level, but I felt that you were kind in sharing it. So I'm going to share something personal as well. When I was 15 years old, I was beat in the streets by two white racist cops who were walking with a basketball. And they were looking for some guy who had shot at some cops about 2 miles away. And he just jumped out. I was probably at that time weighing about 135 pounds. I was a very skinny young man, 15 years old. And they beat me for a very long time with sticks and clubs, and were going to shoot me and stomped me and tore the skin off parts of my body. And the neighbors had to come and stop them, and they turned the guns on the neighbors as well. And then another cop came and stopped them from further harming me. But they didn't have enough control to be able to get me away from those two cops. So I had to ride all the way with those two cops to the scene of the crime, where the captain told them, "What are you doing? We have the person who did it. This is not the person at all." And then they drove me back and told me how I was lucky that they would have shot me and that I better keep my mouth quiet. And I was just very young and I was scared and I didn't speak a word. And when my mom finally caught up with him, I just said, "I just want to go home and I just want to go to sleep." And I dealt with it. And I would like to say that that was the only time, but it made my body cringe anytime I was around a cop or saw a cop for many years. So I could have easily been you, Dominique, right? And lived that, had that situation. And that's why I'm sharing my story with you. So I understand, and I totally feel it. Um, but this is the story of many of us of color, of in areas where we don't have the financial means to defend ourselves and fight back and things like that. And during this conference, I am going to be talking about social degradation and how law enforcement abuse of power creates these forms of degradation in our communities. Um, what I did was I decided that in order for me to address this issue, I need to go into the system. So I went and got a job working for the Manhattan District Attorney's Office Victim Services Unit. And then after a year, I got promoted to be the head of the Drug Treatment Alternative Prison Program, advising the criminal Supreme Court justices on alternative methods of incarceration. And I did that for about 5 years. And in doing that, I was able to encourage judges to not only look at the crimes related to drugs, but to look at crimes in general where people of color were being falsely accused or being manipulated because they didn't have the means, or just being a victim of circumstances in their social environment. And so we were effective, but it's still a lot more work to be done. And this forum that David has put together, that I'm so honored and privileged to be a part of, along with you and Dr. Dominic, it's allowing us the ability to be able to do something finally, to be able to have a voice. And it takes courageous people like everyone in this forum to be able to come forward and do it, because, you know, everyone, there are people like you, Dominique, and myself, that want to speak, but they're afraid of the repercussions because they're still in those environments and they don't necessarily have a way out, right? And so we have the ability now, through this forum, to be able to take those things up forward. I'm trying to lead Wyatt, a group of lobbyists. I'm also doing that chief strategist of lobbying, to take some of the issues that come from the various committees that from Davis forums, and then bringing them up to the appropriate people and try to advocate and do things like that. So I appreciate being here, and that's pretty much it. Take whatever
Charlie, we're
questions.
glad to have you here. And again, Dominique and Charlie, thank you so much for these powerful stories. Um, One of the findings and conclusions of a 2020 National Academies of Sciences workshop titled The Effects of Incarceration and Reentry on Community Health and Well-Being was, and I quote, "The high rate of incarceration in the US contributes significantly to the nation's health inequities, extending beyond those who are imprisoned to families, communities, and the entire society. And since the 1970s, there's been a sevenfold increase in incarceration. This increase in the effects of the post incarceration reentry disproportionately affect low income families and communities of color." End quote. Let's explore that. Who wants to comment about that?
I would like to just say one thing to that statement, and then I'll turn it over to everyone else to really go deep into it. You know, I I learned that incarceration is a necessary thing to happen, but it should be targeted towards the true criminals. So I don't think that we ever are saying that incarceration is a very bad thing. The problem is that it's disproportionately targeted towards only certain groups. It's literally targeting only a certain type of groups. And I would say this, just using New York City, for example, since I was the person there in Manhattan and I know it very well. How can a melting pot where you have every other culture, you have Japanese, you have Russian, you have the whole United Nations, so you have every flavor. Why is it heavily populated with people who are black and brown? going through the criminal justice system. When you have every other national group there, they commit crimes too, but you don't see the police standing in front of their buildings telling them to go in places where they pay rent, places that they own. You're not seeing them police these private areas. You don't see it. You don't see police on Park Avenue telling the people with their chauffeurs that you can't be loitering, you're standing in front of here too long. You don't see any of those things. So, why I like your question, but I just wanted to make sure that I just point that one thing out, because that's really the biggest issue when we talk about social degradation or social issues, is just that they literally are all of the studies is only targeting towards areas that are heavily policed. They're not going to the other places, and I'll leave that to, I see Dominic is itching to get in, so go ahead. Go ahead, Dominic.
Because everything, I had something to say, and so I try to find ways so I don't forget what I was thinking, but then every 5 seconds you would say something else, so I'd be like, oh yeah.
Dominique and I were actually having a conversation very similar to this just the other night. And so my doctorate is in the area of psychology, and social psychology was my major niche. And so I spent a lot of time studying racism and prejudice and stereotypes in the United States. And I'm also a big history buff, right? So I think one of the things that's really tangential about this is the fact that not only in the United States, but in countries across the world, there is a darker skin stereotype, if you will. So even when we look at indigenous cultures throughout the world, those that are of a darker shade are the ones that typically are placed in this situation where they're disenfranchised the most, right? Where they are dealing with the predominance of social injustices. And then if we bring this to the United States, our culture in the United States was built off of concepts of slavery. These things were done on purpose to these particular individuals because we do live in a capitalist society. And if we're living in a capitalist society, we're trying to increase that profit margin however we possibly can, right? And one of the things that is very clearly evident, especially in the Texas prisons, especially when we look at things like the 13th Amendment, where those who are incarcerated are still considered slavery, all of that was done on purpose. To begin with, right? So historically, we're seeing this happening throughout the United States and abroad. And so it makes in the systems that have been put in place within these communities, there's another component of this. There's a socioeconomic component to this. So first of all, we've taken people of color, we've marginalized them to the point where they cannot bring their money. They do not have the financial resources like Dr. Wilson was referring to. And so by default, almost, the people who do have the money and do have the resources are going to make sure that you maintain the status quo so we can continue to utilize them as slave labor. Another key point specifically with the Texas prisons that a lot of people don't know, the products that are made within these Texas prisons go throughout the United States. So once again, emphasizing that slave base and I know, Dominique, you've got so much more to say, so I'm going to cut it off and let you take the line. Take the line.
No,
take it away.
I just felt it when you started speaking about the product sold. Dominique Goodman, used to work for Arizona MVD motor vehicle.
Okay.
Yeah, I worked for them for 60 cents an hour. I think the max I made was 80 cents an hour. So anyone who, I don't know if they still facilitate that now because it's been through so much. But you were speaking to incarcerated women. That's why they tell people not to give them any information on the first round of calls. And I know that there was a deal. I finally looked up the contract when I got out. I think it was literally where they were supposed to pay us like $5 or $6 an hour. What happened to the rest of that money?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What did y'all?
Follow the money.
Oh yeah, try to follow it. So Unicor Unicor, right? Unicor is the corporation that manages the privately owned prisons. Over 4,100 corporations are getting their products produced through prisons. Facts. Okay. And so, if we go back to what Dr. Dominic had mentioned in the 13th Amendment, right? Well, let's look at the evolution historically. Slave, indentured servants, right? Black codes, right? And then, hey, you know what? You can't have them too free. Let's get them back into slavery by giving them a charge, right? Now they're back in the system. You look at places like Louisiana, who for the smallest crime, the sentences are just outrageous. Some of them are like life sentences for very, very small things. It's facts. You can look it up, right? And they literally are producing products that literally, and the reason when Dominique first said she didn't like McDonald's, I thought it was because McDonald's gets their products produced also through the prison system, and that's where I thought you were going, because I was going to say me too, right?
Well, that's McDonald's and Starbucks. Those were also my reasons I don't do that.
All of them are there. So yeah, I'm with Dr. Dominic on this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
The other thing we've got to keep in mind is knowledge is also
Right.
power. So what are we doing to our minority communities? We're keeping them out of the schools. We're seeing in Texas in spades where they're rolling back the clock. They're getting rid of the DEI criteria, which we fought so hard to get our people of color into colleges. I'm a person who, my mother is 1 out of 10. My father is 1 out of 8. Both my grandparents had 12 births, right? I was the first person in both sides of the family to go to college and get a PhD. My cousins have followed suit. But let's go to the old stereotype, and I'm just going to say it. One of the things they used to say about Black folks, if you don't want them to know something, you hide it in a book. Right? So they know what they're doing. There's a strategy to this where they're removing the education from us. They're removing the money for us. So where do we end up? And we end up in prison because we're violating. And we're not even violating. I don't want to use that term at all. But if we were to violate a law and not know that we were violating that law, we are extremely more likely to go to prison than our Caucasian counterparts. Right. So this is done on purpose. There are strategies. If we study in the world of psychology, we can look at all the factors that build racism, all the factors that build prejudice. Those same individuals that have that knowledge are training those that are in the power positions. So they're trying to maintain that status quo, that power, and once again, back to the money.
Okay.
So I just want to say like two things real quick, because you said like with the messages that it was sending or anything. So all I need like the world to know is like whatever image that you have of the individuals that are sitting in prison or how dangerous they are or how criminal and it's like a lie. All of it. Like my niece and nephew they weren't even teenagers, not scared of the individuals that they were seeing at visitation because I was telling them their stories. They're not bad people. It's just like bad circumstance. Some people were doing situations to take care of their families. Some people, to save themselves. Like you hear some of the stories, you don't know what you would have done in that situation. So it's like you start to understand that some of it is just the situation and the individuals that happen to be into it. Now, that does not go to say that there's not people with no conscience in there. They're there.
Okay. Well,
but
the thing, like what Dominic is saying, right? It's Dominic, the underlining thing is that if you starve a community, then they they'll find ways to eat, right? And the whole point is that the circumstances that Dr. Dominic was just mentioning it's the circumstances created by the system. System is they're starving out these communities. They're not putting in the money and not giving them the access and the resources that little Johnny upstate is getting, right? That is the problem. And as a result, with the limited resources, look, hey, what happened with COVID when there was limited toilet paper? People started fighting, right? So now you imagine that is the situation every day in these small communities. And because they know that they're starving the community, they know they got to police it. right? So they starve in the community. Therefore, and instead of giving them what they need so they don't fight, they put law enforcement. So then they create an arrest situation. And then next thing you know, when they go to a system that says, hey, look, hey, this is just your first time offense. Don't look so bad. I tell you what, just plead guilty. And if you don't get into any more trouble in 30 days or 60 days, it will go away. But the young person who is not educated, who's not getting that education because they don't have the books, or we're putting the information in the books buried for them to learn these different things, they don't realize that if they agree to that they now are setting themselves up for a bigger charge later, right? So it's like literally like these systems are, they don't, they're doing things that entice people to take the wrong decision versus the right decision. And that's what I believe Dr. Dominic is mentioning. Right? When you're doing these different things, you're literally forcing the people to take the other alternative because that's all they know. They don't know the other avenues. They don't know the other channels. They don't know about the scholarships, the money, the things that they're entitled to, that every citizen is entitled to. They don't have ways. They don't have people going and giving them the resources, And so what do?
Okay.
Well, you take the other alternative.
Okay, that's very good. I'm going to have to move on to another area, which is, and thank you, Charlie, which is the drivers of mass incarceration. According to the report that I referenced a little bit earlier, and I quote, the best available evidence shows that increasing the number of people behind bars will not reduce crime. Incarceration is not about making communities safer, and the number of people who are in jails and prison is not determined by the crime rate. Instead, the driver of mass incarceration has been policy making, often at the local level, end quote. Who wants to comment on that?
Go for it, Dominic.
So we have like Papa John's, we have Televerdi, we have chicken factories, we have they had like a farm that was near. There's all of these partnered organizations that have, what are they? They have I can't think of the word why, and they have agreements with the prison for hiring inmates. There we go. So I was working also as a messaging and training coordinator at a marketing company. And I would meet with people that work for Hitachi, Vantara, SAP, like all of these advisors. But like the point of it is there's so many companies that make money off of this. And like, so the people that are there, like, yes, I'm going to get paid more. So like, I'm looked at as rich because I'm making $5 an hour right there. But you have to look at it. A messaging and training coordinator teaching agents how to get you meetings. You're paying me $5 an hour. Like, what? That is like gold for this marketing company. So it's just like, everybody has to look at that part of it too. I tell people all the time, look, someone said follow money. They always talk about trying to shut down things with federal prisons. And I had to tell people, you have to see how small federal prison numbers are compared to state prisons. So the numbers compared, they're not really doing anything. Like those are just for like, ticket sales and come vote for me, flash games, like if they want to say something. But like the other things that they claim that they're going to do, they'll never do because even the military makes money off of it. So it's like, it's all a money game. So until people start having honest conversations about how much money America makes off of the prison systems, y'all really are really not talking about defunding the system. Like you guys don't want to talk about that.
The other issue too, Wyatt, is you said something. You gave some numbers. You said increasing the amount of people in prison solves the issue. But here's the thing. Let's just say for a minute, if the intent was to get all of the criminals off the street, well, why is the criminal, right? The criminal has changed, right? Because it's like they increase the amount of people in the prison, and then now you have a big, huge reported incidence of correction officers committing crimes. Isn't
Mm.
that funny? They're poorly
Right.
trained, right? And Dominic is laughing because she poorly trained, right? Now they're bringing them in. Hey, come get a job. Like if they go into work for McDonald's, they don't know how to
Right.
communicate. They talk down to the employee. I mean, to the inmates,
Mm.
right? I'm sorry. Supposed to be rehabilitation. What rehabilitation clinic that have you ever attended where someone's getting psychology or therapy where they being talked down to, you know, um, uh, made to feel less than a person? How is that? How is that rehabilitation?
It's not.
If the whole
Right.
intent of literally, if you watch some of these shows like 60 Days In, you watch literally these correction officers literally telling inmates, you are nothing.
Mm.
You're nothing now. You're nothing. Well, if you were that brilliant, you should never have created the crime. Some of these people are still going through trials. They haven't even been convicted. And they're being spoken to like this. They still, right? You're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. So, yeah, they remanded you, but that didn't make you a criminal. You're just
Right.
waiting your trials. You're fighting your case. If you're not convicted, but you're still in the prison system, why are you being treated like you're already convicted?
And why,
So,
and why do we have so many exonerations? If that's the truth, if
Why don't we have
TikTok,
enough exonerations?
well, there's that part too, right? This is clearly this system
Mm.
is built off of money. It's based off of money. It's based off of, quite frankly, white supremacy, or the components of white supremacy. Because if you're going to make the money, it's not going, and you're part of the person who wants the money. Of course, you're not going to incarcerate your own, right? You're going to be incarcerating everybody else you
Mhm.
possibly can to make the money. If this was simply an issue of public safety and security, then why do we have white collar crimes and blue collar crimes? And why are they both treated differently? And why is it, back to the exoneration issues, why is it when there's a person who says, I didn't commit the crime, there's a DA who says, well, we're not going to run the DNA because we're not? We agree you're probably innocent,
Well,
right? But we're not gonna. So if it's public safety, if that's really at the root of this, well, then make it safe. But you're not. It's a farce.
well, you know what?
yeah, because then you're putting 1 second,
Mhm.
why? Because when you falsely convict a person like Dominique, you now put her life in danger. Because now she's probably sitting there with people who will take her life, right? So how are you? You know what I mean? When you're doing these things, they're stealing the lives of people when they don't give them the fair chance of the same resources to be able to defend themselves. They're literally stealing their lives, right? And literally, it's the social, and I'm sure Dr. Dominic could talk even further about it. The psychological ramifications to an individual who goes through that is you can't even measure the damage. It's so many dimensions of it.
Like to
The damage is like, it goes on. Everybody says, like, how long does it take you to say you just got out? It really depends on the day. Like, I'm going on 5 years, right? Some days I feel like it was yesterday. But they were telling the stories about how they're, speaking down on, individuals. My parents raised a very confident woman, right? And my mom did all the things to make me feel all the ways. And I love her for all her and my dad. I love her for that. Even me, and having my support system and my friends, I had days where I was like, oh, maybe they were right. Maybe I'm
No.
stupid.
Mm-mm.
Because there are literally days that I was defending one of my friends because once you get to know me, I have a mouth. But you're not gonna talk down to us, like like not at all. And she said, I was like, she's actually a nurse, because actually she was giving someone advice because she's a whole nurse, educated, and she got in trouble for whatever. But the woman says, you need to stop giving people advice like you're a nurse. You are a felon.
Let me ask you this question before we wrap up, and this has been really a great, stimulating conversation. My basic question is just how much rehabilitation is going on in prisons?
Not enough. That's for doggone sure. It's really minuscule,
Mm.
right? In fact, the prison system right now is counterintuitive. We have studies about
Mm.
resiliency. We have studies about rehabilitation. We know what it takes to actually rehabilitate people. But as I oftentimes say, just about the heat issue in Texas, being a former professor, I'm not going to ask a student to take a test in weather with humidity that's triple digit. That is counterintuitive. How is that rehabilitating anybody? I'm not going to do what Dominique just mentioned. We're talking down to people and saying, oh, you're not a nurse. That's counterintuitive. We know positive reinforcement is what builds a human being. But instead, we're going to tell them how bad they are, how worthless they are. We're going to cuss them out. So we're creating an even bigger problem than what we started off with. And this has been going on for decades. I was watching prison documentaries as a child, watching about how bad these prisons are. Now I'm actually in this spirit going, wait a minute, we haven't changed this in this long? And in the field of psychology, and we're talking about, I'm so glad David is doing this and centering the conversation on trauma and the impacts of trauma, right? We know how to deal with trauma. We have professionals who can deal with this. Why are we doing the opposite of what these professionals are saying? Because really, the truth of the matter is, these are slaves, and we do not rehabilitate slaves.
I found out that in the military, after you're overseas, there's a reentry process basically that they, facilitate for you to get back to a normal basis or whatever. Let me tell you about that reentry process out of prison into back to what is it? It's a pamphlet I could show you, and it does nothing to prepare you for the reality of it. Like sometimes they show people how to write checks and stuff. Fortunately, I was well versed in a lot of those things, but there's no true facilitation to go back. And there's a lot of people like you'll talk about, if you bring up the like reentry programs, they'll actually laugh like, ha ha, what's that? So it's,
to add further evidence,
another angle I really want to take.
That's a model. There is a Scandinavian model. There are some that are trying to implement those things. So further proof that we don't know how to rehabilitate people, or at least people in Europe know how. But why are we not doing that?
Okay, go ahead.
So one that I would really want to bring up, when looking at the situation, the incarceration, the police system from a different angle. So growing up, I was the true example of growing up in affluent white privilege, nice area, being white, and therefore, so I did have problems in school, stuttering, LD, blah blah. That led me into training in martial arts. That then led me into training cops, correctional officers, and military personnel in self defense. When you are training those who are in these positions, it is consistent that they say cops good, community bad. Now, when going into actually working with the communities and seeing how, I mean, most will say that gangs are so dangerous. What are gangs based on? Protection, family support, based on trying to create some way for kids and for people to be protected, to be cared for in these environments. Do gangs do a lot of bad things? At times they do, in different parts of survival or trying to prove themselves. Yes, some have evolved in different ways. But that being said, I've been in houses where and out of nowhere, the SWAT team comes, busts down the door, and arrests the father of the household. Then the kids of that father are then targeted by the
Ooh.
police. They're often arrested very soon after for doing absolutely nothing. Now you'll hear so many people, and it's always said that criminals lie. The reality is, most the first time they got arrested, most that are black who get arrested the first time they didn't do it, or at least what they did is a minute comparison to what they're being charged
Absolutely.
with. And as Dr. Williamson had discussed, so you have a scenario where no one respects themselves because the community, the law enforcement, those who police the areas have no respect for them, and it leads to this ever evolving problem that we have to fix.
Mm-hmm.
This has to be fixed because it's a constant environment of the old term. Well, it's actually not an old term. It's a very current term. The angry black man and angry black woman. That is complete ridiculousness. But if you perceive it that way, you respond to it that way. You respond very badly, and then those who don't deserve to be arrested are being restrained, beaten up, shot, killed, and so on.
And I think that's the piece. That's the piece that Dave. I think I like the last part that David had mentioned is that we're here to address the ones who should have never been approached nor arrested. You know what I mean? It's the whole issue of the delicate balance of law enforcement not really being able to be not really, law enforcement's goal
Mm.
by the book, the rule of thumb is to eliminate a threat, right? Is to eliminate a threat. So when they show up on a scene somewhere, they're supposed to be able to assess and eliminate the threat, remove the threat. It doesn't say that you must create an arrest. So they can, at their own choosing, look at a situation and can decide to have a conversation and diffuse the situation if it is a real situation. They can exercise it, and they do it in these white communities. A domestic violence situation happens or something, they show up there, they go, hey, do you have a place where you could go tonight? Okay, you can? All right, just don't come back here, okay? Let things cool off. Why they can't do the same thing in the black community or the Spanish community, right? That's the issue,
Mm-hmm.
Wyatt, is that it's just not being able to have that
Right.
balance. So what happens is that, if you go through that other example that Debbie said, someone, SWAT team busts in and gets a parent. If the kid sees an unlawful act happening by law enforcement, the very same cops that are supposed to be protecting them, right? They're supposed to be protecting the community, and they see them do something outside of what they're supposed to be doing, meaning beating them up excessively, arresting them, talking down to them. Do you think that little kid tomorrow, if they really have a problem, they're going to walk over to a cop and say, I have a problem? Or if they see something that's wrong going on, do you think they're going to feel comfortable to say, hey, I want to make you aware of something that's bad happening? You're not. It puts a situation where it's us against them, us versus them. And the real good cops get caught up in it because there are some very
Right.
good cops out there that do the right thing, right? And I think it goes back that cops have to police themselves too. They got to get to the point where these cops, the good cops, have to be empowered, and they're going to have to be able to go and say, hey, my partner look like they need some anger management classes, or my partner don't deserve to wear that badge, right? And get those people off the street so that this way we can really do some real good community, uplifting And I think that any type of alternative prison starts with prevention. And that means being able to get cops going in, to come in, trying to, be a part of a baseball league, be a part of something in the community that uplifts, and be a part of a block party, be there, being social and treating people with respect and speaking to them with respect, because they're a tax-paying citizen. They're a citizen, they're in the community, and their job is first and foremost to make them feel safe, starting with them wearing the badge, approaching them.
I've got one last question here, and I want everyone to please respond, but make your answer 25 words or less. 25 words or less. Okay. The conference, the impact of imprisonment on our communities is important. It's powerful. It's going to help raise awareness and formulate solutions. So, what do you hope to accomplish with the conference? Anyone can start, 25 words or less.
This was actually the perfect segue to what I was going to say anyway.
25 words now. 25 words. Okay.
I hope it provides awareness to everyone, learning of those, previously incarcerated. Just have grace, and understand the process, and, not saying disregard, someone's past, but just understand it. And, let's start changing the narrative. They used to think, people incarcerated were criminals. Let's start telling the truth about who was incarcerated, so we can start looking at each other as humans.
Good deal, Dominique. How about Dr. Amit?
Yeah, so there is strength and unity. And I'm hoping that it helps to unite all of us who are trying to bring that awareness and trying to work towards better conditions of compassion and empathy for overall society and shrink that carceral footprint within the United States.
That is beautiful. Thank you. Okay, Dr. Charlie.
I want to make it a point to make it very clear to people the impact of social degradation and how we can try to create more policies to be able to address it specifically, creating more prevention as opposed to incarceration.
And David Schrank.
I want to see people truly improving their educational knowledge of what services need to be changed and how they need to be improved. Also, to clearly show where policies need to change to support changing system, and above all, adding to really increasing the movement in terms of really coming together, having many organizations coming together to make the change happen nationally, state by state and nationally. Change needs to happen. We have the intelligence here to do it. We have the experience here to do it. And I'll bring in more and more organizations that are nearly as passionate as we are, or as passionate as we are, can make and will make tremendous change. That needs to happen.
That is awesome. So again, it is going to be on Tuesday and Wednesday, March the 26th and 27th in Washington, D.C. It's that Watershed Conference. And I want to thank all of you all for stopping by Wyatt to tell my audience about it.
Thank you.
Thank you so
much.
My
pleasure. Yeah. So y'all, there you have it. You can find the official Wyatt podcast page at WyattEvans.com, the go-to destination for LGBTQ plus news, features, commentary, and entertainment. WyattEvans.com is visited by more than 100 countries on the regular. All I can say to that is, hey, baby. And at WyattEvans.com, you'll find my Smoking Hot, HAWT Hot, Nothing Can Tear Us Apart series of novels. And as you just saw on the top, the newest installment is called Shattered. I said Shattered. And y'all, Shattered is full of action, danger, intrigue, sexually charged situations, passion, and all of the wonderful elements that you're used to in the Nothing Can Tear Us Apart series of novels. So get your new copy of Shattered. Now you can follow me, your host, Wyatt O'Brien Evans, all across social media, and poof is right there for you to peruse, like TikTok and Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. And if you have any comments or whatever, you can hit me up at wyattonair@gmail.com. So until next time, y'all, woof, goddammit, woof, 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 woof. I said woof.